New information about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians and also his father's payoff to porn star Stormy Daniels. Former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel hears on that and more. Then, a constitutional law professor is here to discuss the biggest cases on the Supreme Court's docket, plus whether Justice Anthony Kennedy will retire, and if he does, the huge impact it would have. Also, a bizarre case out of Rockland County. A man admits to trying to have his wife killed, but he could be out of prison in just a few years. She's trying to stop that, and the DA joins us on set with more. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks for joining us. Now, as usual on Wednesdays, we focus on the law, and there's certainly a lot to talk about this week, including with new developments on the Russia probe. Tonight, the biggest news involving Donald Trump Jr. and his now infamous meeting with the Russians at Trump Tower. The Senate Judiciary Committee releasing 2,500 pages of inside accounts and documents on what happened at that infamous Trump Tower meeting between senior Trump campaign officials and Russian emissaries.
The public has a right to know, and the public can go through these 2,000 pages and make up their own mind.
The meeting happened 2 weeks after President Trump secured the Republican nomination. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and campaign chairman Paul Manafort, they sat down with a Russian lawyer at the behest of a music agent for a Russian pop star whose father had close ties to the Kremlin. The agent promising political dirt on Hillary Clinton, but according to transcripts of their testimony, that promise was never fulfilled. And Donald Trump Jr. also told the committee that he never told his father about the meeting before or after, saying, quote, "I wouldn't have wasted his time with it," end quote. But a member of the committee seemed doubtful.
Contention that there was no conversation whatsoever with the president by Donald Trump Jr. defies credibility.
The testimony also sheds light on how Donald Trump Jr. put together his first public response to the meeting. The first version of the statement claimed that the meeting was about only adoptions and failed to mention the promise of political dirt. In Donald Trump Jr.'s testimony, he acknowledges that his father may have had some influence on the statement through former White House aide Hope Hicks, telling the committee, "I believe some of Trump's comments may have been incorporated into the formal response, but this was an effort through lots of people, mostly counsel." On top of all that, more coming out about the payment to Stormy Daniels. The Justice Department and the Office of Government Ethics are now involved, and Trump's admission today that he in fact did fork over the money could make this situation even dicier. Here to discuss that and so much more, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. Roland, as always, a lot to talk about and not enough time, so let me just jump right in. Financial disclosure form. President admitted what he has long denied, that yes, in fact, he wrote a check for $130,000 to Cohen. That doesn't seemingly clear anything up. If anything, with the government ethics office now pushing it to the Department of Justice, that says to me this could be worse, not better for the president.
Yes, this could well constitute an admission of a crime, because if Mr. Trump did give this money to Michael Cohen to pay off Stormy Daniels, to silence her on the eve of the election, that amounts to basically a campaign contribution by Trump, and that belonged on financial forms that were filed a long time ago and were filed falsely, apparently. So that's a bad problem now he's created for himself.
Now, the significance of the documents, but also the process, where you have the Senate committee, bipartisan committee, deciding to release documents about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians. What does that tell you, A, about the substance, but also the fact that Republicans in the U.S. Senate were also willing to turn this over?
I think what this is really an attempt to try to protect Mueller. The senators want to show that there is a there, that there is more than just smoke. There are problems that are very worthy of investigation. And so they are releasing information so that the public will know that there is a very valid set of facts that need to be looked into in great detail by Mr. Mueller.
Now, there's a story that's driven me nuts, Roland. I'll talk about this with a correspondent in Washington in a minute, but it's this whole ZTE story in Indonesia. I mean, I've spent the last year plus of my life here, and I've dragged you into it with me a few times, talking about all the corruption probes in New York and New Jersey with elected officials. And at the crux of all of them was the idea that there's a quid and a quo. They do something, and at the end they get personal enrichment. The idea that the president does a complete 180 on this Chinese firm, a firm that, by the way, all our national intelligence agencies said was against the national security interest to do anything with them. And magically we learn that this Indonesian firm are basically going to fork over millions of dollars to the Trump international industry here. And by the way, this just so happens to come with at the Chinese behest. My God, forget about nakedly being offensive to any sensibilities. Why isn't that criminal?
This is exactly the kind of conduct that is prosecuted as a bribe every day across our country. And if the government can show that there is in fact a link between the payment to the Trump organization in Indonesia and Trump's 180 on the Chinese company's status, if a prosecutor can show that link, that one caused the other, one was linked to the other, that's a prosecutable case of bribery in federal court. And you know, it makes you wonder about where all that money that Michael Cohen was getting went. That's the really important thing we don't know yet. Where did all those millions go?
And to me, it also shows to have the hubris with the world watching to do something like this now with a Mueller probe ongoing. What do we think happened in the first 100 days or so of this administration before they were even chagrined? But I digress. Next up, I will say this comes under the heading of you told me so. When we saw Manafort, more specifically, and that Virginia judge say, wait a minute, Mueller's going outside his lanes right here. This is all about gotcha here. You said, don't listen to the noise. At the end of the day, Manafort's still cooked, at least, and you were right. What happens next to Manafort now that we went past that histrionics? Is he, going to fight this thing to the end? Does he become a cooperating witness too? What's your best guess?
The only reason Paul Manafort is not a cooperating witness yet, in my judgment, is that he's terrified of the Russians. You know, it may well be that poisoning of that former Russian spy in London was really meant as a message for someone like Manafort, that if you flip and you start cooperating with the government, we will find you and we will kill you. That's how bad they are. And that's the only thing I think that's held Manafort back so far. He may decide it's just better to go to trial and lose and potentially go to jail for the rest of my life than to cooperate and risk being killed by the Russians.
Well, this next and maybe final question comes down to as much optics and strategy as anything else. But we've now hit the year mark pretty much since the Mueller probe began. To that end, can you explain to me why Rudy Giuliani is still on TV, seemingly making the case for his client, if you want to call the president that, worse by the day, at the same time that Mr. Flood, who by all accounts, and you can speak to him, is not only respected, but he knows what he's doing. He's gone through this, dance before. He's brought on, and as I understand it, he does not suffer fools gladly. Why is Rudy still talking, and what is Team Trump's legal strategy? Because it seems to run counter to what Flood's trying to do.
I think the strategy to have Rudy out there, blabbing away, is twofold. First, it's a public relations strategy. Trump knows that to survive as president, if there is a majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives, he's got to keep 34 Republican senators in his fold. As long as he's got 34 Republican senators who will not vote to remove him from office, he won't be removed. The secret to that is to whip up his base, keep them angry and anxious, and keep them in his fold. This may also be a strategy that will help him at the midterm elections. Angry Republicans who love Trump as president may turn out to vote so that we don't have a majority in the House of Representatives. That's the sort of PR political strategy going on.
But Roland, if you're Emmett Flood, do you want Rudy going out saying these things?
I don't think you do. I think there's probably a lot of conflict amongst those who are trying to represent and help Trump. And I'm sure that there are many people in the White House that think that what Rudy is doing is a bad thing. But neither Rudy nor Trump take advice from anybody ultimately, and that may be Trump's problem in the end.
Among many. Roland, thank you as always, though. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about next week.
I hope so. I'll speak to you soon, Richard.
You got it.
Yep.
Coming up next, some are calling it a supreme hypocrisy. The same Republicans who blocked President Obama's nominee for the high court now want a vacancy so they can fast track one of their own picks onto the bench. We'll explain.